Hey guys, it's been a while since I've updated my Magic the Gathering decks, and here I am with another analysis. I've updated some of the cards in my decks. So yeah, here we go. This is my Shaman Rock deck, that's what I call it, because it focuses originally on Fauna Shaman, which is a card where you can discard a creature card in your hand to search your deck for another creature. It's based off of an older card called Survival of the Fittest, and it's used in conjunction with Recurring Nightmare, which is a reanimation card. So now I've added some newer cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the latest Magic the Gathering set. So here goes. A lot of these cards, most of them are actually going to be pretty familiar, but some of them will be new. Last time I updated this deck was probably 2018. So anyways, this card, Woodland Cemetery, non-basic land. I mean, it's pretty simple. I think this is from Innistrad. You can tap it to add you got black or green, and yeah, only if you control a swamp or a forest. You have to have a decent amount of basic lands in your deck to use this effectively. And then I got Vengevine, which is a very useful creature. 4 mana for 4/3 with haste is just okay, but it's the second ability that's more interesting. When you cast a spell, if it's a second creature spell you cast this turn, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you play a lot of creatures in one turn, then you basically get this back every time. So it becomes more of a nuisance, and it's a very good creature to have in this kind of deck where you're reanimating and playing creatures basically a lot. All right, and Overgrown Battlement. It's a nice wall to have. It's a 2 mana for a 0/4 raw. By the way, this deck is based on the Rock archetype, which was a very old archetype that was created back in the Tempest block. Rock is basically a deck full of very nice, efficient creatures, and it's a black-green. So that's what this deck is, black-green. So that's where the origin of the name comes from. And they usually contain a lot of walls, actually. So Overgrown Battlement, of course, had this wall in here as defense. 2 mana for 0/4, pretty standard wall stats. But then this one taps to add 1 mana to your mana pool for each creature with Defender, which means it adds 1 mana for each wall I have. And I have 2 different walls in this deck. I have 4 of this one and 4 of Wall Blossoms, the original, the OG Rock wall. So yeah, this is very, very useful for getting mana acceleration. Living Death, a card that was in the old Rock deck, actually. It was actually originally in Tempest and got reprinted. But yeah, this is a very, very good card. 5 mana, each player. Basically what this says is you swap all the creatures on the battlefield with all the creatures in the graveyard. So you take all the creatures on the battlefield, they die. You take all the creatures in the graveyard and you put them on the battlefield. So you swap them. Each player does this. Very, very cool card. I mean, obviously useful if you have a lot of creatures in your graveyard. And I have a lot of creatures that have when this creature dies and when this creature comes into the battlefield effects, called 187 effects. I have a lot of these 187 creatures. So yeah, a lot of effects are triggered when this happens. So very good. Profane Command, very, very versatile instant. Sorcery, sorry. Very, very instant. They have Profane Command, very, very versatile spell here. It's a sorcery. You choose 2. Player loses X life. It's an X cost card. Or you return a creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to play, which means to the battlefield. Or a target creature gets -X, or up to X target creatures gain Fear. Fear is actually an ability that's not really seen much anymore. I think Wizards does not print Fear anymore. They use Menace now instead. So this is actually a very rare ability now. Fear means cannot be blocked except by black creatures or artifact creatures. So yeah, you choose 2 of them, and that makes it very versatile because you have 4 options here. All 4 of these options are pretty nice, and you choose 2 of them, and yeah, just very, very versatile spell. So I really like this spell. Maelstrom Pulse, 3 mana, you destroy a non-land permanent and all other permanents the same name as that permanent. Basically, it's a token killer. Uses on any token, destroys all the tokens with the same name, but also destroys anything really, except for lands. So just generally a very, very useful card. Love Maelstrom Pulse. Yeah, very, very useful. Can destroy almost anything. And the Vengevine, Genesis, very cool card from the Judgment set, one of my favorite sets since that's when I started playing Magic in Judgment block or set. Yes, Odyssey block. 5 mana for 4/4, not very impressive actually. You don't actually want to play this creature. You actually just want to put it in your graveyard. So you either discard it or you sacrifice it. You want this creature card in your graveyard. So the reason is because beginning of your turn, or beginning of your upkeep, if it's in your graveyard, you pay 3 mana. If you do, you return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So that's only if this is in the graveyard, you can use that ability. So if this is in your graveyard, you pay 3 mana at the beginning of your turn, and you get a creature back from your graveyard to your hand. Very useful. It's very hard to remove too, since it activates from the graveyard. Alright, now this is kind of a new card I added. You can test this out, not sure how good this is yet, but Fiend Artisan. 1/1, it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and then you pay X mana. Then you tap it, and you sack another creature. Then you search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less. You put it onto the battlefield. You can only do it during your turn. It's a sorcery. So testing this out could be very useful. I mean, just think about it, right? Like, you pay X mana, and then I try to have like not too many high cost creatures in here. But yeah, then you sacrifice them, then you actually it says, oh, mana cost extra, yeah, so you can sacrifice them. I don't think I have any creatures past mana cost 6 in this deck, so the most you ever pay here is 7 mana. Generally I try not to even pay that much. I try to keep most of my creatures around 3 or 4 mana. So yeah, you would tap it, and then you sacrifice it. You get it directly from your library into the battlefield. So it's not even into your hand, it just goes right onto the battlefield. So very useful. Let me try that out. So next I have Soul Transfer. This is a new card. I chose this card because I think both of these abilities, you can choose one, but if you have an artifact or enchantment, then you can choose both of them. You can exile a creature or planeswalker, or you can return target creature or planeswalker from graveyard to your hand. Both of these are very useful in this deck. 3 mana is not too bad. It's a shame that's a sorcery, but it is pretty powerful. So yeah, I have this in this deck because it's pretty useful for this deck. It's a new card. Then I have Grave Titan. I'm actually very torn between using Grave Titan and Wormcoil Engine here. So here's the two. They're both 6 mana. They both have Death Touch. They're both 6/6. Now the difference is that Grave Titan, when it enters the battlefield or when it attacks, I get 2/2/2s. So this is just a token generator machine. As soon as it comes on the battlefield, I get 2 tokens. Whenever it attacks, I get 2 tokens. So I get very repeatable token generation. However, Wormcoil Engine has lifelink, and when it dies, I get 2 tokens. I get 1 with Death Touch and 1 with lifelink, which is more useful than and they're both 3/3s. So the tokens that this one creates are more useful than these 2/2/2s with vanilla. No abilities, but it doesn't create as many tokens as Grave Titan. So it's really, I'm kind of deciding between these two. I mean, they're both 6 mana, so they're probably the highest costed cards in this deck. Both have Death Touch, but Wormcoil Engine has lifelink, and then when it dies, the tokens are more useful. Grave Titan, the tokens are not as useful, but it can create more of them because it'll create them every time it attacks. And it creates them as soon as it comes onto the battlefield, so the impact is more immediate. So I'm still thinking between these two, which one's better. But yeah, Wormcoil Engine, Grave Titan. Right now I have Grave Titan here right now. I might think about, I'm still testing it. Maybe I'll go back to Wormcoil, but it's tough between those two. Solace of Malcolm, pretty stable card for this deck because it has an effect when it comes into the battlefield, and it has another effect when it dies. So it comes to the battlefield, I get a basic land card, and then when it dies, I draw a card. So there's 2 effects that happen when it comes on the battlefield and when it dies. That makes it very, very useful. So gotta have that card. Maelstrom Pulse. Woodland. Okay, here's the other wall here. This is the OG rock wall, the Wall of Blossoms. This was in this deck back in the Spiritmonger days, back when this kind of deck ran Spiritmonger as kind of the main big creature monster. Now we have much better options than Spiritmonger, obviously. Wormcoil Engine and Grave Titan by itself are better than Spiritmonger, but yeah, this was back in the old rock days. This is from Stronghold, very old set. But yeah, the OG wall is still very useful. Wall of Blossoms. It's 2 mana for 0/4, and then comes into play, you draw a card. I mean, simple and effective. So can't really argue with that. This is how the old school summon wall. I mean, look at that. It's very old. Kukusho, the 6 mana card. When it dies, each opponent loses 5 life, and you gain life equal to the life lost. Very useful card when you play multiplayer, right? You're playing like not just a 1-on-1, but you play multiplayer, then everyone loses 5 life, and you gain a whole bunch of life from that. And every time it dies, you get that life. So yeah, very, very useful card. And then Cauldron of Souls is interesting. You can tap to choose any number of creatures, and each of those creatures gain persist, which means when it dies, it'll come back into the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter. And yeah, I mean, this just gets an extra use out of all my abilities of all the creatures. So this is very, very useful to have. Just gets an extra use, right? They'll come back to the battlefield and it'll trigger something again. Cavalier of the Night, another new card. Pretty interesting. So it's 5 mana for 4/5 lifelink. Then when it enters the battlefield, I sacrifice another creature. If I do that, I destroy a creature an opponent controls. So yeah, that's useful. And then when it dies, I get a creature back with converted mana cost 3 or less from my graveyard to the battlefield. So it does something when it enters, it does something when it dies. That's useful to have in this deck, and having lifelink is always a bonus in this deck. Alright, Junji in the Midnight Sky. Costs 1 mana less than Kokusho, which is interesting. 5/5, Flying and Menace. So when it dies, I choose one. Then I choose one. So each opponent will discard 2 cards and loses 2 life. This is really good for multiplayer. Or I get a non-dragon creature card from graveyard onto the battlefield and I lose 2 life. Again, very useful for this deck. Both abilities are very useful. So I have that. Great Pact as my enchantment. This is a very deadly enchantment for this deck, actually. Whenever any creature I control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. So I do a lot of sacrificing in this deck. So when a creature dies, everyone else has to sacrifice a creature. Very useful for this deck. Recurring Nightmare is the key card for this deck. Never been reprinted. It's from Exodus. Sacrifice a creature, return it to this. So this is a very cheap card because normally, you know, it's hard to destroy enchantments when they're not there, right? So yeah, I sack a creature and I return this enchantment to my hand, meaning that the only way for them to destroy it would be with an instant. And then I get a creature from my graveyard back into the battlefield. So yeah, this is a recurring way to get creatures from my graveyard back into the battlefield, which will trigger more of their abilities. So very, very good card. Never been reprinted. Only 3 mana too. Fauna Shaman, that's the name of this deck, Shaman Rock, namesake. It's 2/2. Main ability is discard a creature card, you search your library for a creature card and put it in your hand. Very, very useful because you put a creature in your graveyard, which you can then use with Recurring Nightmare to bring it back. And then you get another creature, which can be any creature in the deck. So very, very useful. Yeah, just search for, it's a tutor, right? It's a tutor, but you also get a creature in the graveyard, which you can use to reanimate. Very useful. Okay, Mimic Bat is very interesting. This one has an imprint. So whenever a non-token creature dies, I can exile it, but then if I exile it, I can return other cards exiled to the graveyard, so it's just a temporary exile, it's not a permanent exile, which is key because I actually do need the creatures in the deck to be in the graveyard. So 3 mana, I can put a token on the battlefield, it's a copy of the exiled card. Very key for this deck because it has, there's a lot of enter the battlefield abilities in this deck. And there's a lot of, when this creature dies, when this creature enters the battlefield, very, very key. Actually, this gets exiled. Okay, so the dies wouldn't trigger, but when the creature enters the battlefield, those abilities would all trigger. Those effects would trigger whenever I create a token of it. So that's very useful. And then Acidic Slime is an example I'm talking about. When it enters the battlefield, so that means it'll trigger when I use a Mimic Bat on it. It's a Death Touch. Enters the battlefield, I basically naturalize something, or actually destroy a land too, so it's even better. Destroy artifact, enchantment, or land. So yeah, very, very useful card. Just can hit pretty much yeah, 3 different things. So it's a very I often search for this creature when I tutor for it. Only have this one, but that's all I need. Then this card is interesting, almost like Genesis actually, except he has to stay on the battlefield. So he's actually from Portals, I think. Portal. Tap, put a creature card from my graveyard on top of my deck. So it's a Volrath Stronghold ability in a creature. And then I have my only Planeswalker right now, Volska Golgari Queen. First ability, sacrifice another permanent. If I do gain 1 life, draw a card. Very synergistic with my other cards here. Whenever a creature dies, you know, trigger that. Second one, destroy target non-land permanent. Very useful. Commander counts 3 or less, so it's a smother. Very useful. And then I get an emblem. Whenever a creature deals damage, that player loses the game. So it has a Phage the Untouchable emblem. So that's pretty good. Pretty good effect. Of course, you rarely would trigger that one since it has 9 counters to use. Yeah, my Elder. Another one when it has a die effect. When it puts in the graveyard, I search my library for 2 basic land cards and put in my hand, and I can additionally sacrifice to draw a card, which gives me massive card advantage, really, because when this thing dies, I get 2 basic lands and a card, so yeah, pretty big card advantage if I use the ability. And Oversoul Cemetery. Beginning my upkeep, I have 4 more creature cards in my graveyard. I can return one of them to my hand for free. And it's only 2 mana. So it's a repeatable effect. Very, very useful. The other new dragon that came out, Kura the Boundless Sky. It's a 4/4 flying Death Touch. When it dies, I can choose one. I can search my library for 3 land cards and put in my hand. So it's like a super powered version of Yavimaya Elder. Or I can create an XX token where X is the number of lands I control. So that's a pretty big creature. So I can choose one of those when it dies. Nice effect. A Demonic Tutor and a Vampiric Tutor here. So I switch my life for a card and put it in my hand. Very, very powerful ability. Or I can pay 1 life, search my library for a card, and put on top of my deck. It's not as good as Demonic Tutor, but it's 1 mana. So it's cheaper, and it's an instant. So in many ways, Vampiric Tutor could be better than Demonic Tutor. Demonic Tutor gives it right into your hand. Vampiric Tutor puts on top of your deck, but it's 1 mana, and it's an instant. So they're both really good. They're both restricted, so... Yeah, Kitchen Finks, really good card. 3 mana for 3/2. When it comes into play, gone into battlefield, gain 2 life. It's good for this deck. Persist, and then when it dies, this comes back with a -1/-1, and I gain another 2 life. And then if it comes back into play with another effect, then it comes back without the -1, and I can keep using it. So this creature will come back several more times. So yeah, very, very useful. It has built. In fact, it has Persist, and it's one of the best Persist creatures. Probably actually the best Persist creature. Kitchen Finks. Friction Arena. It gives you an extra card a turn. Draw an extra card a turn, you lose 1 life. Overall, very, very useful card, right? You draw an extra card and you only lose 1 life. Really not a big cost to pay for getting an extra card. And then I actually have some interesting lands here as well. I have Yavimaya Hollow. Legendary land from Urza's Destiny. You can use 1 mana to regenerate a creature. Cheap effect, very nice. Sylvan Library, yeah, this is basically Friction Arena, except it's Friction Arena, except I don't have to necessarily pay. Actually, it's not Friction Arena, it's Sensei's Divining Top, essentially. So I don't get an extra card unless I pay 4 life for it. So that's 4 life is a lot more than Friction Arena, but it allows me to find my good cards faster because it's like Divining Top. Every turn I can draw like 3 cards basically and just put 2 cards on top of my deck. So I just draw the best of 3 every turn. Very, very useful. And this is the other cool land I have from Stronghold. Blue Stronghold, I can tap 2 mana, put a creature card from my graveyard on top of my deck. So it's that Huator Guy effect on a land. So that's much better because lands are much harder to kill than creatures. And then Eternal Witness is so good. When it enters the battlefield, get any card from my graveyard back to my hand. Just, yeah, 3 mana. Get any card from my graveyard to my hand. So good. One of the best creatures ever. And then last card here is Black Sun Zenith. X mana, I can put X -1/-1 counters on each creature, and I shuffle it back into my deck so I can reuse it. So yeah, it's a reusable effect. It's mass kill. It's, I think, better than Mutilate. Almost... It's different than Damnation. And Damnation is really good too for this deck, for any black deck to destroy creatures. It just destroys every creature outright. But there are some cases where Black Sun Zenith may be more useful because of the -1/-1 counters. It's like you can kill indestructible stuff with this. Like Damnation can't. Damnation can't kill indestructible stuff. This one can, and this one you can reuse. Goes back in the deck. So that's it. That's the Shaman Rock deck. Newly updated with some new cards from. Mostly kept the same, but there's some updates. So that's it. Thanks for watching.